Shonen Jump is a place of inspiration for many, a magazine that encourages heroes to stand up for what is right and for friends to always support each other. In their opposition, however, there needs to be a villain, an antagonist that stands in the way of those ideals. That is at the heart of many types of stories, but Shonen Jump emphasizes the importance of villains as a core part of its ethos, an idea that has been established for decades and has only evolved more with each passing era. Some of the most iconic characters in the magazine are evildoers, and sometimes they even manage to outshine the heroes that we are expected to cheer for. Villains are a key factor in why I love these stories so much. Often I find myself won over by their endless charisma or deeply fascinated with the nuanced motivation behind their goals. There's a variety of reasons for why they can be so damn compelling, and I want to focus on a few ways that some of Shonen Jump's best villains have explored the concept of being evil. One of the most exciting ways to characterize a villain is by empowering them, usually in a physical sense. At the greatest heights of strength, they become threats to not only other characters, but to everything surrounding them. It's a tale as classic as time itself, a world-threatening supervillain being stopped by a hero that rises to the challenge. Let's take a moment and rewind to the year 1989. In chapter 247 of Dragon Ball, a new villain had emerged in Shonen Jump's pages, Frieza, a character that challenged what it meant to be threatening. For full transparency, there were certainly great villains in and outside of Dragon Ball that preceded Frieza, including other iconic characters like Piccolo and Vegeta, but few managed to be the sheer reign of terror that Frieza was. What set him apart was his ability to sell the idea that he was powerful enough to destroy any and everything, our heroes, entire planets, and maybe even the universe. That immense power is backed up by a menacing personality that has all the comfort of burning hot coals. He is condescending, egomaniacal, and malicious beyond comprehension. He really is the emperor of the universe that stands as the apex of all life forms, and he acts like it. The reason fans celebrate his character is not so much that he was strong, it was how he wielded that strength with an iron fist, unafraid to destroy everything in his path to obtaining the Dragon Balls. His presence is that of a god among men, and that makes him one of the earliest examples of a Jump villain being a threat to the world itself, the stakes of which set a new benchmark for what the series and Jump was capable of doing. Frieza is, by all means, a pretty simple villain by today's standards, but he still manages to be exciting to root against. Speaking from personal experience, I found myself blasting through the Namek saga because I wanted to see how he could possibly be taken down. The heroes are certainly weaker, but they still stand against one of the strongest beings in the universe, despite any and all fear. How could that not be exciting? The difference between a villain of godlike strength and the weaker heroes that struggle against him is a delicate balance, one that could easily topple over. The villain needs to be significantly more powerful, yes, but also have some sort of weakness that the heroes can take advantage of to overcome that gap. Goku and Frieza's fight is still a hallmark of Battle Shonen for all these reasons, regardless of its simplicity. The climax is action-packed, the stakes are incredibly high, and Frieza is just a complete menace. In the next saga, Dragon Ball would see a shift to a new antagonist that falls under the same category, but manages to stand apart through his motivation and origin. What makes Cell interesting as a follow-up to Frieza is his progression to becoming a perfect being. He starts as a relatively strong creature, but one that could be easily defeated by the strongest Z fighters. Before long, Cell develops his newfound powers and abilities by absorbing the energy of others. As an antagonist, he takes all the battle experience and strength of the main characters and uses it to threaten the safety of the Earth and all of its inhabitants, including our beloved heroes. Even though Cell is perhaps less iconic than Frieza, I love his role as a villain, battling all the Z fighters one after another in a game to show off his might. He poses just as much of a threat as Frieza, and he doubles down on the idea that a villain should be multiple times stronger than the heroes. Cell's devastating power pushes Gohan to the absolute limit, fully unleashing his latent inner strength in what is arguably the most emotionally impactful scene of Dragon Ball. This antagonistic pressure is exactly what you would want out of a villain that is a physical threat to the world. Akira Toriyama forged these monsters out of the heaviest metal, and his influence in shonen villains will be felt for decades to come. Since 1989, there have been tons of new baddies that caused mass destruction, some of which we'll be discussing in another context, but few have left the lasting legacy that Frieza and Cell did. If I had to say why that is, it's their conviction to win their battles, even if it means having to unleash every ounce of strength they can. In shonen battles, fighting is usually the means to accomplishing a goal, but in Dragon Ball, sometimes winning the fight is the goal itself. And these villains feel like impossible mountains for our heroes to climb. They blow apart landscapes, crush all that stand before them, and remind us that it takes blood, sweat, and tears to save the world. When given power, what is a Shonen Jump villain supposed to do? Usually, they will try to destroy the world, overthrow nations, or become the most supreme being in the universe. As we've now discussed, antagonists like those in Dragon Ball and most other battle shonen attack the world in some way, and it is the protagonist that is challenged to stop them. However, One Piece is very clever in how it flips that formula on its head and does the opposite. The status quo of the world is set by the villains and enforced by their power, while it is the heroes that play offense. One Piece is fundamentally a story about freedom and liberation, and so it is fitting that the villains stand in opposition of those values through established dictatorships and oppression of innocence. Typically, each new island and country the Straw Hats visit has already been taken over by a horrible pirate or a corrupt world government figure, and it is up to them to defeat whoever is making the people of that land suffer. As early as the East Blue Saga, you could witness how the world occasionally gave power to abusers, but it was in the Alabasta Saga that this became the most common way for Ichiro Oda to write villains. Crocodile was one of the 7 warlords, a title granted by the world government, and he used that status to gain political, economic, and social power over the country of Alabasta. Luffy and his crew travel through a sizable portion of the Grand Line just to stop Crocodile and save Alabasta from its current state, not necessarily to protect it as it has been. By the time the Straw Hats even set foot in the country, he had full control of its people, both as a pseudo-savior of the land and the hidden boss of Baroque works, enough so that he had stripped away much of the king's reputation. It's hard not to hate Crocodile because he is using his status to effortlessly pull the strings of this country towards self-destruction, all to serve his larger plan. He concocts a massive scheme to overthrow the kingdom, and for all intents and purposes, he is mere steps away from that goal. He is empowered not just by physical strength, but by abusing his power over the people of Alabasta. Yet another example is the Dressrosa arc, one of my personal favorites despite a number of criticisms about its pacing, and the villain Doflamingo. Where Crocodile nearly accomplished taking over Alabasta, Doflamingo has truly managed to take the reins as the awful king of a beautiful country. His ruling is terrible. The people are extremely oppressed, the previous royal family has been torn down to nothing, and the worst part is that no one can even speak the truth. This is a cruel dictatorship. As the Straw Hats make their way onto Dressrosa, one thing becomes clear. Doflamingo has the entire country in the palm of his hand. No one can step up to oppose him, and anyone who tries will be severely punished. It's fitting that his power is to control others with strings, because not a single person could ever hope to break free from his rule. Most recently, Wano, which is an incredibly gorgeous country, had been taken advantage of by a false shogun and one of the 4 emperors. What really struck me about the Wano saga was how impoverished the people of this land are, with many of them being sick and starved for food. The setting of Wano is harsh and cruel, despite how lush the scenery can be, and the reason for that is the deeds of a couple evil men that only have their self-interest in mind. They abuse every bit of their power to sit on their thrones and watch as the citizens of Wano suffer beneath them. It makes me sick thinking that anyone would ever sit on their massive amounts of power and wealth and do nothing to help the people of their country, choosing to instead run it into the ground. That is about as despicable as you can get. In all three of these examples, it is overwhelmingly exciting to see Luffy beat the hell out of these scumbags, because One Piece is not about villains stealing the liberty of people, it is about the Straw Hats giving liberty back to the people. By framing conflict this way, evil becomes something greater than a threat. It becomes a reality that has to be stopped. Abusers of power and villains that use their strength to suppress those weaker than themselves are nothing more than trash that take advantage of others. That is one of the most volatile forms of evil you will ever be able to find in Shonen Jump, and so, it only makes sense that every time Luffy saves a country, the party is always warranted and much appreciated. Freedom is the best celebration of victory, after all. To scale the discussion back, being able to destroy the world is not the only method of antagonism, and I would argue that the more interesting way to write a villain is to give them the tools necessary to be a personal attack on the protagonist. Rather than having a simple conflict of interest, these tools will allow the villain to pry open the weaknesses of the protagonist and repeatedly strike their flaws as a hero, giving the audience a glimpse into a more intimate side to both characters. A villain that has a personal relationship with the hero should be designed around their weaknesses, uniquely being able to attack their ideals, beliefs, or vulnerabilities. This type of antagonism corners the protagonist into hard decisions and disrupts their emotional stability. In Shonen Jump, few villains manage to do what Makima was able to, completely break down the hero to their fundamentals and destroy their ego. While she shows her true might in the climax of the first part, her presence isn't like that of the Dragon Ball villains. Rather than overwhelming physical power, she has frightening dominance. She is in control of every scene that she is in, whether she is an emotional comfort to Denji or making her subordinates bow to their knees. She is intimidating, mysterious, and even a little scary. But she has a gentleness to her words and expressions that belie her devilish plans. Her cunning, sly personality and ability to manipulate those around her is what makes her so dangerous. It's worth noting that Makima is an extremely uncommon case of a Shonen Jump villain being a woman, and it's in her being a woman that she is able to be characterized in this particular way. From Denji's perspective, she is a potential romantic partner, and that opens him up for vulnerabilities that a male antagonist would not be able to attack. Granted that Denji is heterosexual, which I believe he is. He is a teenage boy who dreams of romancing an attractive girl, and from the moment Makima gets her hands on him, she uses that to manipulate and groom him. It's rare to have a hero that is so emotionally attached to a villain, and it's even more rare for one to be their romantic desire. Yet she takes advantage of his feelings every step of the way, building up his happiness with intention to snuff it out later. She listens to his feelings, gives him comfort, and lures him in with empty promises. Makima is everything Denji wants, but she is a villain for a reason. She never cared about him, that much was obvious from chapter 1, but the way she manipulates him with herself as the object of his desire is just gross. It feels as if she knows every little detail about what's in his heart and mind. She's got him figured out. Many times throughout the story, she weasels her way into his heart when his motivation is wavering. She just wraps him around her finger until her grip is so tight that he's never going to get away. Just as often as she manipulates his love for her, she weaponizes that love and destroys everything else. I've never seen another Shonen Jump antagonist that uses the protagonist's love for them as the primary means to attack them, but she does so effortlessly. Makima is a fantastic example of how a good villain can be a great antagonist when paired up with the proper protagonist. No other antagonist could uniquely attack Denji's desires, feelings, and motivations in the ways that she does. They are a perfect pair, and it is Denji's job as the protagonist to overcome the ways she personally attacks him. He must face the reality that she only ever cared about his chainsaw devil heart, and that her beliefs fundamentally contradict what he values in life. And so, she must be removed like the pest that she is. Another way to form a personal relationship between the protagonist and antagonist is to create a duality, to make the villain a darkened parallel to the hero. It's fascinating to see what a hero would be like if their life turned out different or if their sense of justice was tarnished, while also revealing potential holes in their philosophies. Few Shonen Jump series enjoy paralleling villains with its hero more than Naruto, which does that at least 3 separate times with 3 different antagonists throughout its story, each one furthering the growth and maturity of its protagonist. The first was Gaara during the early to middle portion of Part 1, who, much like Naruto, has one of the tailed beasts sealed within his body. In his childhood, he was ostracized and treated as a demon by all those around, and that filled him with extreme loneliness that grew into hatred. He had no friends or family that could believe in him, and in that way, he was just like Naruto. The difference is that Naruto didn't give up on trying to find acceptance, and he was eventually able to find friends and a big brother figure. Those people were able to save him from being consumed by his loneliness, but the same cannot be said of Gaara. Soon after being introduced, he starts going on murderous rampages, and it seems as if nothing can stop his malice. As to be expected, this puts the two on a collision course, destined to fight each other. In the end, Naruto comes to understand what made Gaara the monster he is, and breaks through to him with empathy. By paralleling Naruto to a villain who had a strikingly similar history and set of circumstances, we get a fuller picture of his suffering while emotionally developing Gaara's story. After their battle, Gaara opens his heart back up to his siblings and turns his life around to be more accepting of others. A great conclusion that proves empathizing with the enemy can be more powerful than your fist. Further into the series, Pain, or Nagato if you prefer, also has some very noteworthy parallels to Naruto, but instead of their circumstances being the same, it's their roles in the ninja world and their relationship to Jiraiya that draws a mirror between the two. In essence, it's the prophecy that Jiraiya spent his life trying to find, the child who would either cause great stability or destruction, that paints the two characters as mirrored outcomes. Jiraiya believed that Nagato may have been this child and trained him with the hopes that he would one day bring peace. Before he assumed the identity of Pain, he genuinely was trying to better the world, and the Akatsuki even started out as an organization with good intentions. Unfortunately, this would not last. Nagato's goals would become malformed by the cruelty of the war that taught him pain. The hopes he once had for making the world a better place had been misshapen into a deep hatred for its current state of being. He takes on a dark motivation as he walks a path of destruction, believing that peace cannot exist without first inflicting the same pain that he suffered. His strong conviction and powerful words shoot holes right through Naruto's optimistic beliefs. Faced with an incredibly difficult question, one that asks for him to self-reflect on his own ability to help the world, Naruto struggles to confront these opposing ideals that seemingly stomp on all that he believes in. There is no easy solution, yet he chooses to not give up. That is the difference between their views. Naruto is unwilling to give up trying and believes that the world will only heal by ending the cycle of hatred, and so he chooses to not take revenge on Nagato. Do you think it's a coincidence that after putting a stop to the one who was supposed to save the ninja world, Naruto himself is fully accepted and respected in that very same world? Of course it isn't. The two have a lot in common, especially the lessons they learned from Jiraiya, but Nagato chose to give up on solving the world's problems through peaceful means. He is what Naruto could have become if he gave up on bettering the world and chose to push his pain onto others, while Naruto is, in some ways, the person that Nagato should have been. Much like with Gaara, he represents a possible outcome of Naruto's experiences, but through efforts to understand and empathize with each other, he is once again able to believe in the teachings of their master. He passes on his hopes for the world onto his successor, who will do what he was supposed to, end the cycle of hatred. And that brings us to the last and most direct parallel of Naruto, Obito. Take one glance at their color scheme and it's obvious that their designs are the inverse of the other. He was written and drawn with the full intention of making him the ultimate parallel. Where Gaara reveals the darker side of his loneliness and lack of acceptance, or Nagato failed to be the prophesied child that he became, Obito is a heartbreaking twist on the most intrinsically true part of who he is, the dream of becoming Hokage and protecting those that are most important. Obito is the corruption of Naruto's dreams. While he didn't grow up in the exact same circumstances, nor were expectations of being a savior placed on him, he had all the same childhood dreams with every bit as much naive wonder. He was a goofball kid with a one-sided crush and a heated rivalry who only wished to become someone the village would acknowledge. That's why Naruto, who grew up to be just like him, can't understand why he turned his back on their shared dream. However, Obito is from a different time and generation, his childhood being influenced by a great war. When the ninja world failed him, he believed that it was irredeemable and sought to create an idealized version of it, hoping to escape into a false reality where everyone could be happy. He left behind his original dream for an escapist fantasy that denies the harsh realities of life. Naruto still holds the dream of becoming Hokage close, even when the world tries to tear him down, and that's why Obito gets under his skin more than any other villain. He sees himself in who his enemy used to be, despite all the bloodshed and war that surrounds their battle. Obito tries to detach from the past, dreams and bonds alike, but Naruto's refusal to let go of those very same things shakes him to his core. By the war arc, that little kid that was just like him had become a fully realized person, someone who could no longer fall to existential threats. He went through everything life had to throw at him. He was completely alone as a child, constantly wanted to be seen by peers that shunned him, was repeatedly told to give up on his best friend, and was even asked how he could fix the world with ideals alone. It is only at this point that Naruto, after never giving up no matter the challenge he faced, was able to make Obito remember who he is. As an antagonist, it's hard to want anything more out of his parallels to the protagonist. While Nagato is often praised for being the best villain in the series, personally speaking, I really love Obito's contribution to the story, and I think he holistically completes Naruto as a character in the series thematically. Regardless of which antagonist we're talking about, it's hard not to feel sympathy for these characters who simply lost their way. Their similarities to Naruto shine a light on how even good people can become villains. Their evil is a tarnished good. Gaara gave up on trying to find acceptance, Nagato gave up on trying to help the world through peaceful means, and Obito gave up on his dream of becoming Hokage and protecting those that he cares about. Each villain speaks volumes about Naruto's own unwillingness to give up on his friends, values, and even his dream. The story uses antagonism to heighten the strengths of its protagonist, and it accomplishes that by designing its villains to be dark reflections of Naruto that he has to overcome and save. It encourages never giving up, especially on the bonds that make the people we are, and that message couldn't exist without its villains. In Shonen Jump, it's common for villains to have some sort of idealistic goal behind their actions. In fact, of the characters we've discussed so far, most had some sort of vision for a better world that they would create through force. Of course, they were still committing undeniably evil deeds, However, none of these characters were the protagonist. Stories in general, and certainly most Shonen Jump titles, do not want to follow the perspective of an evildoer. These are supposed to be inspiring stories of youth and courage after all. Enter Death Note, a series that challenged the audience to see an entire story through the lens of one of anime's most wicked figures, Light Yagami. Light is introduced as malicious, narcissistic, and beyond evil. He kills people he deems to be a plague to society, but also anyone who attempts to defy his judgment. Whether they are innocent or not, it doesn't matter. Going against Kira is punishable. If Kira is a god who wishes to make the world a better place for the innocent, then Light is an egotistical maniac to even think he has the right to punish those that go against Kira. He is but a man, yet he believes himself to be a literal god. This ego does not take long to sprout an evil, cruel villain within. He deliberately challenges those who defy him with intent to kill, rather than focusing on ridding the world of bad people and ignoring L and other pursuers. And this is where moral complications start to arise. For a nameless space to quietly appear and punish evildoers, and to suppress those who might otherwise commit crime, there are a great number of people who are saved by Kira, find comfort in his actions, or become inspired to do good because of his message. Even for his detractors, it's hard to deny how Kira is making the world a safer place for the innocent. That's Kira though, the figure who has no real name or face, a symbol of selfless justice. Light couldn't be any further away from that image, and more importantly, we are directly following the man behind Kira's name every step of the way. Because Light takes up the mantle of being the protagonist, it's easy to root for him despite how truly evil he is. Him getting caught means the end of the mind games and battle of wits, and those are always so entertaining to see unfold. Yet it's equally disturbing when his thought process as he plans to kill innocent people is laid out on paper in excruciating detail. Because you spend so much time inside his head, you're exposed to some pretty vile thoughts that eclipse anything the supervillains of the neighboring pages of Shonen Jump ever revealed. That just adds to the juicy drama though. What makes Light such a compelling protagonist is that even though he is remarkably evil in mind and soul, his reasoning is almost convincing enough to make you think that his actions are just. It takes a formidable opponent to directly confront a villain with such strong conviction, and that's where L comes into play. While he acknowledges that what Kira is doing is fundamentally evil, that is not why he takes on the case. Instead, L sees solving the Kira case as a game, a puzzle of sorts that he is determined to win. As an antagonist, L isn't so much a hero. In fact, in his own way, he sees people as tools to use, but he is a rival to Light. He constantly reminds the reader that he is not a figure of justice and that he only takes cases that personally interest him, with the See Kira one-shot reaffirming this as true, and Oba does refer to him as slightly evil. In truth, I agree with that assessment, but that's what makes it interesting to see his conflict with Light. One thinks they are justice, but in actuality is just evil, and the other knows that they are not justice, but uses the police force and FBI as tools to win the game. Their pursuit of each other is inherently a display of evil of some kind, with both trying to reveal the other's identity for nothing more than selfish pride. Damn the world itself. Forcing a morally bankrupt protagonist to compete with an ethically questionable antagonist, neither one of which is genuinely fighting for the good of others, is an entertaining method of conflict that's only possible in this unique variation of evil. What if someone with evil intent was under our nose the whole time? This is a disturbing question because most anyone can relate. If you have a lively community, there is sure to be a few evildoers lurking in its shadows because society is not limited to upstanding citizens. What's scary is that we don't always know who a wolf in sheep's clothing might be because they don't have to look, act, or feel like a wolf to be one. For all you know, it could be your neighbor or coworker that'll come knocking on your door one day. The ruthless villain of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Diamond is Unbreakable, Yoshikage Kira, just so happens to be one of those wolves. He wants to live his life in peace without standing out and is an everyday man to most eyes. He works a normal job, is respected by peers, goes to bed early, does daily stretches, and eats healthfully. His accomplishments are minute, as to not leave an impression on anyone. If anything, his life seems boring and a little too simple. He doesn't stand out at all in a positive or negative way, yet under that facade, his soul is venomous. So far, every one of these villains have used supernatural powers to accomplish their goals or existed in a world filled with the fantastical. While that remains true for Kira, I think it's important to note that he is not defined by those things. Unlike the villains that can drastically alter the state of the world, he is almost so normal that he could exist in our own reality. The fantasy surrounding him is just a veneer of his everyday life. When compared to either Dio or Cars, both of whom wanted to conquer the world itself, he is a complete curveball, and that's exactly what Hirohiko Araki was going for, who explains, "I love Kira's personality. He is always calm and tries to keep a low profile. He consistently does his best to live a quiet life, which includes secretly killing women and always having a hand to hold. Literally. While he is a cold-blooded killer, he still lives out a seemingly normal life. The contrast of normality and the horrific is an extreme combination. The outcome could have been horribly mixed, but it ultimately crafted one of Shonen Jump's most complex villains to date. The stakes of JoJo's fourth part are much smaller on a worldwide scale, but Kira's crimes are intimately threatening to the characters who inhabit this tiny slice of the world. The way that part 4 utilizes Kira is the opposite of Dio and Cars, whose antagonistic goals push the scale to bigger proportions. His crimes are shown as terrible, but not world-threatening. That does not make him a weaker antagonist though, as he is a threat to Morio, which is the entirety of Part 4's scope. The smaller setting makes Kira's presence more relevant. His villainous acts are just as effective because the scale is smaller. When you zoom out the scope, he is no bigger of a threat than Jack the Ripper or Jay Guile, who were both quickly discarded in their respective parts. However, unlike those two, Part 4 paints Kira as much more than a simple killer. When we start to peel back the layers and look a little deeper, he becomes ever more frightening. Determined to conceal his destructive nature, he goes to the greatest lengths possible to blend into the background. Hiding in the shadows, waiting for his next target, leaving without a trace, and re-entering society every time. He is the scariest of serial killers. We get introduced to Kira midway through the story after establishing the main characters, their bonds, and plenty of their friends. Instead of meeting him through the eyes of the good guys, the arc Yoshikage Kira wants to live quietly is told through his own point of view. The exciting prospect is that we get to witness who Kira is without the bias of the protagonist's perspective. This point of view changes the way we may have otherwise seen him. We learn that this awful serial killer we've been hearing about isn't an unintelligible or outwardly violent person. On the contrary, he is highly intelligent, has an office job, and goes to the park for lunch. This is information that is necessary to making him an understandable villain. It also forms a strange bond between the audience and Kira. We know he is a murderer who should be caught, but it's hard not to pity his desperation in the moments where he nearly gets caught. The uneasy relationship between the reader and Kira created by this point of view changes everything. It persuades the audience, if only a little, to think about why he is this way as we grow to understand his desires to have a peaceful life and witness his conviction in maintaining it. After he slips into the life of the man he replaced, Kosaku, the story enters a period of time where Kira contends with his new family. It tests his conviction in a new way. He cannot kill anyone if he wishes to remain hidden. If he so much as leaves a single clue, he knows that there are people out there that will immediately find him. Never mind that he must uphold a facade as to not make the family suspicious of him. He cannot kill right now, no matter how much he lusts for it, and this develops his character in unexpected ways. Chapter 112 contains one of my favorite moments of Diamond is Unbreakable. While looking out of a window, Kira glances at a woman walking down the street and laments how he can't show his true self to anyone. This lets us finally know his innermost feelings. He murders not out of violence, but as a form of self-expression. He wants to not only kill, but to show others his desire to kill. It's a subtle but tremendously effective way of creating a twisted sadness for Kira. The scene characterizes him as a somewhat tragic person. He is doing all he can to hold back his desire so that he can maintain his peaceful life, but it is in his nature to murder. This chapter and similar moments go to great lengths to portray Kira as a person who struggles with his inner demons. He needs another person who can understand him, but he kills every single person who might have been able to. To sum up why Kira is such a fantastic villain, let me ask a question. Are you more scared of an alien life form blowing up the world and killing everybody, or a serial killer hiding in your neighborhood, just trying to stop his bloodlust from festering? My answer isn't Frieza, that's for sure. Kira is not just a bad guy, he is a genuinely scary representation of the everyday evils that lurk in our backyards and apartment complexes. Not many villains in Shonen Jump are as wonderfully crafted as Kira, nor are many as wicked and terrifying. With far greater emphasis placed on creating a believable and layered person who happens to be evil, Hirohiko Araki wrote him as an evil man, not a god or literal monster. Kira is just another side to the nature of humans, the wicked, cruel, and evil side. He too is a part of Morio and its people. He is the big bad wolf that lives down the street from you, and you better hope he never comes knocking on your door. Let's take everything we've discussed so far and really ask, what does it mean to be a villain, and what is evil? Among the villains we've looked at today, I would posit that Frieza is the most truly evil, as he represents a physical threat to the world that exists only to serve himself and his empire. Cell is arguably just as evil though, because he has immense power and uses all of his strength for nothing more than to make himself even more powerful. These villains are excellent in antagonism, but they are limited by their simplicity. So what happens when you give this sort of being nuance? What happens when they begin to love someone much weaker than themselves? What happens when you subvert the very meaning of evil? You end up with my favorite Shonen Jump villain. Let's start at the very beginning with the horrific biology of the Chimera ants, an invasive species that consumes copious amounts of food. Through the fictional process of phagogenesis, the queen ant passes down traits of their prey to her offspring. These creatures start to resemble various animals and gain their unique abilities, while also developing humanoid features. They are consuming any and all kinds of life forms. The ants begin to look less like insects and more like freaks of nature. Her children are then made to be soldiers that bring her more food, until she is able to give birth to the 3 royal guards and the colony's new king. As they continue to search for new food, humans with nin abilities become part of their menu, which grants her offsprings greater intelligence and more ferocious power. It's hard to say if Chimera ants are innately evil beings just because they consume the weak to build their own colonies stronger. They are animals after all, but once they gain human-like sentience, their hunger for power becomes somewhat sinister. At what point do we draw the line between nature enacting its purpose and malicious killing? Ideologically, the Chimera ants are a species that evolved to devour the weak for the greater good of their colony, but perhaps under the influence of their human DNA, some ants begin to strongly value their own strength and position in the hierarchy. That can be seen no more apparently than with the birth of their king. Upon being born, Meruem discards the queen entirely, kills 2 subordinates for stepping out of line, and demands food to satiate his hunger, all within moments of coming to be. This is what it means to be born evil. He begins to seek out humans with nin energy in order to consume them and steal their power, brutally killing any victim that happens to be in his path. And this is where you can really see Cell's influence. Both characters are born as monstrous amalgamations of other strong beings who then go on to search for even more power through absorption. Much like how Cell absorbed his enemies so that he could become his perfect self, Meruem consumes nin users to become an even more powerful apex predator. He takes it a step further, however, and decides to learn strategic board games to expand his tactical skills, eventually beating the best chess, shogi, and go players the world has to offer. His intelligence is far beyond the average person, and his capability to learn is above the entirety of humanity. His final opponent is Komugi, a Gungi champion and the most dominant player the game has ever seen. Yet for all that acclaim, she is otherwise a dimwit and, more imperatively, blind. She is every bit as physically weak as the humans Meruem would kill without hesitation, but she beats him at Gungi over and over again. He rapidly improves his understanding of the game's mechanics and even conjures his own strategies, but she is always years ahead of his gameplay. After losing so many times, Meruem begins to question the meaning of strength. He acknowledges that Komugi is strong, but her strength comes in the form of Gungi. While he still believes that violence is the ultimate force in the world, he is confronted with the question, what does it truly mean to be strong? This calls back to how Cell was driven to become more powerful as a way of becoming a complete perfect being, and his biggest obstacles were the heroes that mustered up even greater strength to defeat him. What stands in Meruem's way is not Super Saiyans, however. It is a meager girl who lacks any strength outside of a single board game. Meruem has been defeated not in a physical sense, but an ideological sense. He must admit that there can be value to humans that are weaker than himself. With this new change in view, he comes to the conclusion that true power is meant to protect the weak that deserves to live. His power is not for crushing the defeated, it is for stopping inequality between people and giving the weak a chance to stand on their own. This changes everything we've come to know about him, his views on the world, and even his role as a villain. Does that mean Meruem is suddenly a good guy? Of course not. His status as a villain is not determined by his decision to protect hand-picked humans or an ability to love a single girl. Don't be mistaken, he is still evil, only now with more complexity. His growth as an individual makes him feel tangible. As he continues to interact with his environment around him, other Chimera Ants, his royal guards, supreme leaders, hunters, and of course Komugi, it's as if each exchange adds a new layer to his character. Although Meruem has not been redeemed per se, he has self-reflected and through understanding his own feelings, begins to see the injustice of humanity. He hopes to reset the way the world works, allowing humans with value to be safe and for those without any value to be food, a complete restructuring of the natural order, but a structure that promotes fairness in his eyes. Under his rule, everyone would be treated accordingly and the truly special humans would be the only ones given privilege. In his world, at least weak humans deserving of being protected would be, well, protected. Meruem is a subversion of evil because his motivations ask, what if the villain wished to use their power to stop the even greater evil of mankind? Humans, just as the ants, consume the weak and the strong do nothing to help. We are no better than the ants, and it is arguable that we can be even worse. It is fitting then that this arc also sees the maddening downward spiral of its protagonist, Gon. Just like Meruem is a subversion of a world-threatening villain, he is also a subversion of a villain that parallels the main character. It's no coincidence that during his talk with Netero, Meruem sits in the same position that Gon has been in for many chapters at this point, only he is sitting to talk diplomatically about the state of the human world, and Gon is sitting in a seething anger, ready to kill at a moment's notice. Their arcs are in opposing trajectories. Meruem chooses to leave behind murderous intent, while Gon loses sight of everything but a malicious intent to kill. Meruem wants to protect people like Komugi, yet Gon could care less if he has to kill her. Who exactly is supposed to be the hero here? I guess there is no hero. Sometimes Meruem is mistaken to have become good, but that's not it. He is still a killer that wants to sit at the apex of all life forms. He is unquestionably evil, and yet his evil is outmatched by the humans in this story. Meruem's plan is to cultivate humans as food, yes, but we have done so much worse to each other, a harm that cannot be quantified. Netero only defeats him by using a weapon of mass destruction that has killed millions, far more than the Chimera Ants ever had. Do not underestimate the bottomless malice of humanity. This makes me ask once again, what even is evil? Is it the harming of innocent lives? Is it sitting atop the throne of all life forms? Is it the consumption of the weak to make oneself more powerful? Maybe simply existing, being a part of this awful world is inherently evil, but what else can we do? Humans, ants, it makes no difference. We're all beasts with our own self-interest. Meruem was made from humans. He is the evolution of the evil humanity itself harbors. However, it was also a single, small, blind human girl that taught him that a weaker person can still have value. Humanity made him evil, but it also made him love. Perhaps if he had more time, he could have gained even more appreciation for the human race. We'll never know, because humanity snuffed him out. What I do know is that Meruem is a fantastic character, one that subverts our understanding of evil and asks us what it even means to be evil. And he is my favorite Shonen Jump villain. I've never cared this much for what should be a completely despicable being, but just like how I continue to love Gon and his friends no matter what immoral actions they take, Meruem is a nuanced and emotionally compelling character that won over my heart. I admittedly cried when he succumbed to the poison, playing Gungi with the one person he loved, fading into darkness. Humanity, nature itself, may be evil, capable of horrible travesties, but it can also be beautiful. Komugi sees that beauty in Meruem too, unafraid of him, despite all the atrocities he committed, and willing to die to continue being by his side. In his final moments, Meruem is not a god or even a king. He is not an evil villain or a selfless hero. He is just one person who found his place to belong, right next to the person that changed him for the better. Evolution is not just about getting stronger, it is the capability to grow as a person, and there's nothing evil about that. It's stories like these that highlight why I love villains so much. Whether they put an unbearable weight on the hero's shoulders to carry, or embody a twisted motivation in themselves to change the world, the best villains add a human element to their stories. They will push the protagonist into corners and pull at the seams of the story, but they themselves can also be characters worth following. As much as they can reveal a dark truth about the hero or the injustice of their societies, they can also tell us something about ourselves. In the worst way possible, they're kind of relatable. People are imperfect beings that struggle to always do the right thing. Sometimes we convince ourselves that we are in the right or that we're stronger than we are. While heroes are who we should aspire to be like, villains serve as a reminder that life isn't so simple. Yet that's why it's so rewarding to see a villain fall to their knees at the hands of a hero. Shonen Jump prides itself on having engaging protagonists that can gather attention, but they need antagonists that can keep a reader invested, and it's really that emotional connection that keeps so many of us coming back. Whether they are dealt a crushing defeat, turn over a new leaf, or just exist as a piece of their world, villains are just as important for why I love manga so much. Regardless of where they fall on the spectrum of evil, they are the support that these stories need.